Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to look at my current raid build, and yes, this is a mini microphone. This is because people kept commenting saying that my voice in the voiceover sounded different to the start of the video, and it's basically because this room is super echoey, so we're going to give this a try instead. Let's go. So we're going to start off by testing the original raid build at test dummy and then testing the new raid build on the dummy as well to see if there's a difference in damage. Now this build is one that I've used for quite a while. This is what I was running G6 with, and it's also what I was running G1 with in the new updated Helliquary bosses. So this gives quite good damage, you can see here. I'm going to do a 30-second test for both of them because obviously sustained damage is really important during Helliquary raids. So we're going to do 30 seconds in total and see exactly what the damage per second works out as. So for this we've got 2.1 million damage per second and 63.3 million in 30 seconds, so not too bad. This is a build that a few content creators have covered as well, but what we're going to do is swap out the Disintegrate for Arcane Torrent because you know I'm obsessed with that skill. So we're going to make sure that we have the right essences on all the parts here. So we're going to go for a Novel Castigation on the pants for Arcane Torrent. We're going to swap this main hand for the Rift Carver. So this original main hand was giving 19% damage on the Disintegrate, and we're going to swap out the shoulder for one that works with Ice Armor just because there's no other essences on the shoulder that actually work within this build. So let's find where it is. I'm looking for Galebrind or Galebrind. There we go. So that's what we're going to go for in this build. So we've just swapped out 3 essences from Disintegrate. So that's 3 essences that were stacking on the Disintegrate skill. And now we're going to also swap out the skill, so swapping Disintegrate for Arcane Torrent, and we're going to test this again for 30 seconds. And I have also got a couple of pieces with the Arcane Torrent magic on it. So this is really strong, like I've covered before in a previous video. The Eternal Gear is really worth having, and I actually really like having it for the Arcane Torrent. It does definitely make a difference from what I've seen. So a few of my other gear pieces have the buff for Lightning Nova as well. And also for Ice Armor. So let's test this out now and see if we can get a higher DPS for the 30-second test. So although the skills have a slightly longer cooldown, you can see this is given just under 2.5 million damage per second, so a good increase there just from swapping out one skill and a few essences. And you can see here as well, the majority of the damage is actually coming from Magic Missile, followed by Arcane Torrent. There's a lot of damage coming from Arcane Torrent there, and also from Lightning Nova. Now, it doesn't look like there's a lot of damage from Black Hole, but this is because this is a buff skill, so when you launch that Black Hole, the damage is increased from all your skills and primary attack as well, so that's why we're using that one. And again, Ice Armor damage isn't that high, but it is what it is, and overall this is quite a strong build for raids, as you can see from this test. What we're going to do now is actually run them side by side in a raid so you can see which one is quicker, and then also look at the build overall, and I'll go through all the details. So for this, I'm running the Uthmash raid, and I'm doing this on Inferno 1 difficulty. I'm not yet running Inferno 2 raids. Myself and my warband decided to save these until we are closer to Paragon 400, just so that we hopefully get some decent gear drops for that. So on the left we have the new updated build, and on the right we have the original build. I also made sure that my ultimate was charged and engaged at the same time in both raids to make the test as fair as possible. However, I did feel that I was doing a lot more damage with the build on the left, even though the build on the right currently has me further along in the progress of the raid. But I ultimately did more damage at the start of the raid on the left, so I probably won't get through all of the phases of the raid that I will with the original build. As you can see, raid 1 is already over. I've taken Ufmash card down, and it was a much faster time, whereas raid 2 with the original build is still going. Now, as I mentioned, the original build is one that I kind of copied from other content creators for Diablo, so it was meant to be a really strong build. However, with the added eternal gear, it definitely does give more damage having eternal gear for the skills that you're using. So like I mentioned, using it with Arcane Torrent, it will give you a lot more damage than using this build on the right that has 3 essences stacked on just Disintegrate. So in theory, that should be a stronger build, but you can see here the time was a lot different. It was almost 40 seconds slower. So now we're going to go through everything that I'm using in this build, starting with start items. So we're using 4 pieces of Vitus. So this increases the duration of all beneficial effects on you or your party members by 30% and increases the target attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds each time you use a skill to grant a beneficial effect to yourself or a party member. So that works really nicely in this, alongside 4 pieces of Grace. So all continual damage, channeled damage and persistent ground damage is increased by 15%, and each time you damage an individual enemy 5 times, you will do 17,465 additional damage to that enemy. So I find using 4 pieces of each works really nicely. Moving on to Helm, we're using Silver Lining. Black Hole now devours the power of enemies caught within it, increasing the damage you deal by 28.5% for 6 seconds. Black Hole cooldown is decreased 10% there from the Awakened slot as well. So that's what I was mentioning earlier. We are using Rampant and Inscrutable for Lightning Nova. So Lightning Nova now conjures a lightning orb that orbits you, firing lightning bolts at your target when you use your primary attack. Lightning Nova damage is increased by 18%, and damage is also increased 10% there from the Awakened slot. We're using Gelbrind or Goldbrind on the shoulder. So Ice Armor also causes your primary attacks to decrease enemy movement speed by 40% for 3.2 seconds, and Ice Armor cooldown is decreased by 10%. We're also using 2 pieces of Cursed properties. So we're using Nettled here. So this one will gain you a shield, and it will counterattack, dealing 40% of your damage to all nearby enemies. Cannot occur more often than once every 90 seconds. Novel Castigation on the pants. So Arcane Torrent also fires tracking missiles that seek out enemies, dealing 12,580 damage. Damage is increased by 90%, and Arcane Torrent damage increased 10% from the Awakened slot. We're also using 2 pieces of Wired. So after you kill an enemy, release a surge of lightning that jumps 6 times between nearby enemies and deals 60% of your damage to them. Effect cannot occur more than once every 30 seconds, but that one works really nicely as well within this build. So I didn't used to use the Curse properties. I only started using them when they took away the Ancestral Tableau bonuses, but do look into using those on your gear if you haven't already done that. On the main hand, we're using Rift Carver. So Arcane Torrent now creates a chaotic orb that moves with you and fires arcane missiles at random nearby enemies. Arcane Torrent damage is increased by 18% and an additional 10% from the Awakened slot. And then we do also have the magic buff on this. So it conjures 1 arcane bolt to orbit around you, dealing 6,308 damage. But I have 2 pieces of that active, so that is doubled. Obviously, you can get up to 4 pieces of that. Heart of the Storm on the offhand. Ice Armor becomes Storm Armor, continually damaging nearby enemies. Ice Armor damage is increased 18% and an additional 10% from the Awakened slot. Now, if you are below combat rating for the raids, I'd recommend swapping this out for the Hailstone Essence, which will give you 6 hit immunity instead. So I alternate between the 2 depending on the difficulty and depending on whether or not I am above or below the combat rating for whatever instance I'm playing. Thunderbird's Bite on the alternate main hand. Lightning Nova damage is increased 19% and the cooldown is decreased 10%. Nice and simple, but works really well with this build. And then Chaos Rupture on the alternate offhand. Black Hole instead conjures an unstable star which explodes when it expires, damaging nearby enemies. Black Hole damage is increased 18% and Black Hole cooldown is reduced by 10%. So just going to quickly touch on legendary gems, and the ones that I'm using here, they're basically the same ones I use all the time because I don't really swap my legendary gems out. So we're using one of my favourites, which is Blood-Soaked Jade. Alongside this, we're using Starfire Shard, Roiling Consequence, Pain Clasp, Seeping Bile, Bottled Hope, Gloom Cask and Mother's Lament. Now obviously we have critical hit chance coming from Mother's Lament and Roiling Consequence as well, so those work really nicely in this build, and a continual damage from Seeping Bile when that effect is active. Now I also have a charm which has increased damage for Black Hole, Magic Missile and Arcane Torrent, so that works really nicely within this build too. Now the last couple of things I'm going to touch on are obviously Paragon and also the other warband buff as well. So for Paragon, we're using Unseen Dynamism. You now gain a stack of Unseen Dynamism as you hit enemies with either primary attack or skill, and attacks must alternate between a primary attack or skill to build stacks. Unseen Dynamism increases your damage by 1% for every stack up to a maximum of 10 stacks for 3 seconds. So I really like this skill, and this is obviously the Slinger Paragon tree that we're using. We've got Fury. Using a skill while in combat increases your critical hit chance by 1% for 10 seconds. Fury stacks up to 5 times, but all stacks are removed when you take damage. Uncanny. When you have 10 or more stacks of Unseen Dynamism, you will gain Uncanny, which increases your critical hit chance by 6.5%. Gifted. Unseen Dynamism can now stack up to 15 times, and Deadly Intent damage is increased by 2%. So basically using the Paragon tree to stack damage, to have that damage from critical hit chance and just increase damage as well. And lastly, the warband buff that I'm using for this, I'm using the attacker buff. So damage done is increased by 3.5%. Critical hit chance is increased by 1%, and we've got that twice with these remnants. Increase your damage dealt by 1% for 2 seconds every time you deal damage. This effect stacks up to 10 times and is removed when you take damage. Increases critical hit chance by 3% while above 70% of your total life, and increases critical hit damage by 10% while your critical hit chance is greater than 70%. And obviously we've got critical hit chance coming from a lot of different places in this build, as well as having a few gear pieces with critical hit chance. So that is basically it from me today. I hope you found this video helpful. I definitely recommend trying out this build, and like I said, swapping out Ice Armor Essence for Hailstone if you are below combat rating. But that's it from me for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you for watching.